Much for being here and welcome. My name is Minoria Ravindran and I'm London correspondent for The Ankler and senior contributing editor for broadcast. Just a little audio description as well. I'm a South Asian woman. I'm wearing a black t-shirt with the word immigrant on it. I'm wearing a skirt and silver shoes as well. I just want to give a thank you actually to our session partners, Bectu and of course Directors UK before we start. They made this possible, thank you to them. We're obviously here today to discuss the freelancer crisis within the TV industry, which I think will in some way affect many of the people in this room. But I do also want to acknowledge that a lot of the people that this does affect simply won't have been able to afford to come to Edinburgh. And of course they'll watch this online at some point, but I just right at the top, I just want to mention that a lot of the people that we're talking about aren't actually in this room. However, we are very fortunate to of course, have some representatives for the freelance community on this panel who will strive to reflect their perspectives. Now we've got 45 minutes for this panel discussion, and then we'll dig into potentially 40 minutes. We'll see how many questions we have, and then we'll dig into questions that come in via the app, and I'm sure a number of you have now become familiar with the app, but there's a Q&A tab and you sort of pick the room and you submit your questions. So please do that. I've got the Slido here, so I'll be going through those. Just a small intro here, but of course many of us will be familiar with how we got to this point in the freelance crisis. Some of these issues came to the fore in early 2020 at the onset of the pandemic, and some of you will remember the Freelance Charter back in 2021 through, of course, Coalition for Change that tried to address various concerns and did. Then, of course, as the industry got back on its feet, we saw a purple patch in production where there was, in fact, an overabundance of work in 2021 and 22. But later that year and at the beginning of 23, there was a crisis declared by Bectu. We saw unscripted begin to really unravel and people come out of work for long periods. The BBC license fee was frozen for 2 years. The advertising recession began to take hold and impact commercial broadcasters. And then came not one, but two Hollywood strikes, along with Wall Street's great streaming correction. So all of these elements have really convened in a way that affects freelancers the most. And while Bectu's recent survey results showed more than 52% of the freelance workforce is actually jobless, those who are working, and that's the thing, are doing much more in less time for less money. And so this is leaving workers feeling crunched and burned out, but ultimately unable to stop because of the dearth of available opportunities. And so I wanted to provide this bit of intro because we don't want to sort of dwell too much on the reasons in terms of the market conditions of how we've gotten to here, but more talk about solutions, and this panel is meant to be very forward-looking. So to discuss the crisis and the ways in which we can work towards a more sustainable freelance model, we have an excellent panel with us today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves with audio descriptions.
So I'm James Taylor. I'm the co-chair of the unscripted branch of Bectu, but I'm a freelancer myself first and foremost. I'm a series editor and co-executive producer, and I am in my early 40s with a beard and a light jacket. Early 40s, remember. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Abigail Dankwa. I'm a freelance multi-camera and fixed-rig TV director. I'm also on the board of Directors UK. I am a black woman with black long hair, black and pink top and black trousers.
And I'm Philippa Childs, the head of Bectu. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman. I'm not going to mention my age. I have grey hair and short grey hair and black glasses, and I'm wearing a blue and green top and black trousers.
Hi, I'm Richard Watcham. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of UK TV. I'm also the Deputy Chair of the CDN, and I co-wrote the Freelance Charter. It's worth saying that out now. I am a white man with glasses and dark hair, a white shirt and black trousers.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimberly Godbolt. I'm Joint MD of Talented People. I'm a white woman with blonde hair and a bright pink jumpsuit, which has been a pain to attach the radio mic to. Yeah, nice to be here.
Brilliant. Before we get in as well, I just want to quickly give another word of thanks to a couple of different organizations, the Film and TV Charity, of course, and the TV Mindset too, which has been so useful. I know a number of you have been seeing their Facebook page and seeing a lot of the posts, and I want to give credit where it's due because they've been really, really supportive of this session and ensuring that we're all on the same page. So I think that's important to do too. James, I just wanted to start with you in terms of questions, just because for you and Abigail to really set us off, you're obviously in direct, so obviously as co-chair of the unscripted branch, you're in direct contact with members constantly. You've been fielding comments as well from people ahead of this session. What are you hearing about? What are people saying about recent months in particular, and what are the pressure points?
To be honest, I don't really know where to start, and I could honestly do 45 minutes just on that.
You've got pages.
Yeah, exactly. But just so you understand as well, in terms of the unscripted branch, so we look after production management, editorial and development, so I think it's important to explain that. But there's two major things that I think we keep hearing about. One is the ongoing lack of work, and also the inherent instability that goes with working in TV, and I think that's a pretty major thing that keeps coming up. Many feel it no longer seems to be a full-time, year-round job, and that's without mentioning when you are working, you're working harder than you ever have before, burning out quicker. There's a lack of fairness and diversity in recruitment. When you are being recruited, sometimes you get ghosted after you've had your interview. There's a lack of support and active disenfranchisement for parents in the industry. The fact that people are leaving in droves. There are support groups. There's one called TV Switch Up to help people leave the industry and support them do that. So look, then I ran out of page, so I thought I better stop writing. And then open it up to everything. But they're just a few things to get us going with. Okay.
So Abigail, one thing is that people have said they don't necessarily want to go back to a model in which it's a staff model and people are full-time effectively. We need to make this model work. How do you sort of envision a more sustainable freelance model? I mean, where do you
That is a big question to ask a freelancer to answer, when I have no idea what the budgets are. I'm not involved with any of the money, so I think it's quite unfair to be asking me that question. I also feel a bit strongly about the kind of title of this session, in that it feels like it looks like it's the freelancers that are creating this crisis, when it really is a commissioning crisis, and it's a commissioning crisis because there isn't any money. I think it's for the people who have the money or had the money. They really have to sort that out, but work with freelancers in a way to make it more sustainable. But I think we might have to admit that it's not going to go back to the heady heights of pre-pandemic era, and we're in a brave new world where people are nipping at our heels, whether it's branded content or social media. There are things that are taking the money and the eyeballs away from the traditional television that freelancers work in, and it's a horrible thing to say, but I think we have to be alive to that. My concern is that the different constituencies within the freelancing industry all have an important part to play in this, but they're the ones that are going to be are currently impacted by it. So if you are a person who has disabilities, or if you're from a low-income background, if you're a person of colour, if you are a person who has caring responsibilities, if you're in the nations and regions, the whole lot of us are all being impacted in it, and it's going to be quite a challenging thing to work out how we navigate and manage from here onwards. I think my real concern is, and I might, throughout this thing, just concentrate on, I might say directors, but I actually mean all freelancers. It's obviously because I'm a board member. It's just there is talk about, and we've had it in different sessions, about the sort of macro events of what's happening. My concern is about people who want to know how they're going to pay their rent or mortgage at the end of the month, or they are losing their house, and you only have to read the Facebook groups to see the dire straits people are in. And that's, if we're talking about solutions, it's great to have big solutions, but what are we going to talk about the people who are having issues right now? That's the kind of concern I have.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the discussion that we're probably going to have, and even for action for freelancers, of course, there's help sort of coming, but it will be some time before we see those things implemented. Philippa, obviously Bectu's been doing a lot of work in this area, rightly. In the King's Speech, of course, Labour sort of set out plans to help the country self-employed. Have you sort of been having conversations with them, and what are they saying in regards? Obviously, their definition of self-employed and how it relates to the creative sector is slightly different, right?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think almost for as long as I've been in this role, because of the pandemic, as you said, I've been talking about the impact of government policy and the way that we engage freelancers in the UK, and the lack of rights for freelancers and the lack of support more generally. It feels like it's been a constant theme that we've been talking about through the pandemic, and then since then, quite frankly. And I think, as Abigail says, how can we continue with a model where people genuinely don't know how they're going to pay their bills, or whether they're going to have a house to live in, or, you know, thanks for mentioning the film and TV charity, because they have been absolutely magnificent in terms of handing out grants to people through this crisis and through the pandemic and so on. But we just can't continue with a situation where the industry relies on a workforce that simply goes from one crisis to another through no fault of their own. So we've been really talking to all sorts of politicians, but you know, Labour since back when Tracy Brabin was the Shadow Secretary of State, and throughout the various changes about what can we do to better support the workforce. And I think that starts with understanding the creative industries and how the creative industries engage the workforce and freelancers and the self-employed. First, to support them, then you have to understand how that works. And then, yes, we've obviously been building bridges with the current team pre the election. So we had meetings with Thangam, unfortunately she's not there now, but Chris Bryant as well, and the rest of the team, and we are continuing to have those conversations. And just one of the strands of work that is going on at the moment, which is not directly with Labour yet, but it is designed to look at what can we do structurally to better support the freelance workforce, is a piece of research that's happening that we're involved in, and various industry stakeholders are involved in, to look at what happens in other jurisdictions to support creatives and the creative workforce. And we just want to have a look at what's available elsewhere, what might be possible to do in the UK, which provides some help and support through situations like this, which obviously creative workers face elsewhere as well. So yes, those conversations are ongoing. We've got a meeting coming up with Chris Bryant. He's well aware, I know, of this current crisis, and we will be pressing for action.
Got it. And jurisdictions, places like France, for example, right? And
yeah,
other countries.
Indeed.
Who bears the responsibility for freelancers ultimately? I mean, is it too much? I'm sometimes in an interesting position where I wonder if, you know, is too much of the onus put on production companies, but then, you know, for example, in conversations with the broadcaster, they'll be like, oh, well, it's the production company, really. But then the production company is there being completely squeezed right on both ends, and ultimately, it's the budget that they're getting from the broadcaster that they then have to do, that spreads so thin and then affects everybody on the in the chain. I mean, what is the sort of how did we get to this position where there's no accountability, and what do we do going forward?
Well, can I tell you something? I don't think there is no accountability, and I think the answer to that question is that we all have responsibility, and I think we need to stop pointing at other people. We need to look at what we ourselves can do. I think, you know, I feel really strongly that we have, and I'm sure a lot of people in this room do, we have the most skilled creative workforce globally, but we will only have that if we support them, right? And so I think it is on all of us. And I've got to say, really early on, I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed by the number of people in this room, because it is on all of us to solve this. Not just the people on this panel, but also the people sitting there. And I'm really disappointed that people haven't lent into it more and realised that they need to play a part. So this has kind of reminded me of some of the work that we need to do, some of the conversations that Philippa and I have had early, to activate people and to actually get them to understand the part that they can play in trying to solve and
I think the problem is they feel that the part, they haven't got a part to play because they don't have the money. I'm a freelancer. Yes, there's a part for me to play, but my part comes because you as a commissioner have given an indie some money to produce a programme. So if I find it quite problematic in that we're expecting freelancers to do something, or other people to do something, where they're not at the epicenter of this crisis. if we don't have the resource of money to make the TV programmes, it makes it quite difficult.
Well, so I agree with you to a degree. First of all, I don't think I think it's everybody other than the freelancers in many ways, and I think the freelancers need to be really involved in coming up with solutions. But it's not the responsibility is not on them to solve it. And I think about money, I agree with you. Money can solve everything, but the money is the money, right? The money. There's a lot of forces that are working on the market that are outside of my control and outside the control of everyone here. And actually, I think you'd agree. There's a lot of stuff that we can do that isn't about money. There's a lot of stuff that we can do about behaviours, there's stuff we can do about recruitment, there's stuff we can do about advertising jobs, there's a lot of stuff that we can put in place that will help. And in many ways, actually, what we're all trying to do is, as an industry, as I say, we need to protect our creative freelancers. We're being kind of attacked in a way by the market forces. And it's about us working together to soften the impact of that. Some of that is about money, yes, but there's a bunch of other stuff that we can do.
The bunch of other stuff, I think, only pertains to people who actually are in work. Most of it feels like, for me. Because you are right, we have a very sort of weird setup when it comes to job search and trying to find people to fulfill roles, in that it's a very sort of, if you're not in the club, you're not in the clique, you don't know the right person, if you can't broach that, then unfortunately you're sitting on the sidelines. It goes back to the thing I was saying before about the different constituencies. If we can solve for the people who get the least, then most people will be sorted, I think. But I don't think we are doing that. And I think when you come to a crunch time like this, when there are lack of resources, people do what humans do, which is go back to the people they know the most, because it's quicker, it's easier, you've got a shortcut, and I get it, because cognitively that's how we work. But it feels unfair to people who are outside of that, who also want to make a career. They also want to have the same as everybody else, a good life, doing something they love. And it's not happening at the moment.
We'll absolutely get to some questions around recruitment for sure. But I did want to ask Abigail and James as well, and certainly other people who want to chip in. But our production company is overpromising on what they can really deliver in order to secure commissions. And then I'm hearing that a lot from where I stand as well. There's a lot of overpromising, and then ultimately everyone is squeezed because one person is doing the job of 4 or 5 people. What are the knock-on effects of this?
Yeah, I honestly think that, I understand indies that obviously want to take on the work because they're desperate for work, like freelancers are desperate for work. And so, of course, they're going to say yes, they want to make this series for this particular budget because they'll just take the work. And what we need to work out is how we stop the crap rolling downhill to the freelancers, because it is all landing on the shoulders of freelancers, because they're the ones who are having to do the jobs of like an extra person, for example, because the staffing budget's smaller, or they're the ones who the schedule shrunk, so they're having to do more in a shorter space of time. So this is where it's all happening, and how it's having an impact on the day-to-day of the people that are working. And I've said before that it's created this 2-tier system where those who aren't working are really struggling, having a really tough time, but those who are working, as I said before, harder than they've ever had to work and having a really tough time as well. So and I don't think that is all on the indies. I really don't. I think that it needs to, like we've already talked about, but there isn't a magic money tree. So to borrow a phrase, so it's like how do we change the other aspects around that and improve things?
Yeah. Could we create more jobs out of fewer? I suppose, is there a way to create jobs without then affecting rates, right, and people's pay?
How do you create more jobs if you don't have the money?
Well, I mean, in terms of taking the resources and effectively trying to basically create more positions within a production without affecting how much you're paying people, right? Like, so where do the jobs sort of come from is my question.
I don't think anyone can magic up jobs, and the fact is right now there just isn't enough jobs to go round, and that's obviously why everything has got worse as well, because when things are really great we can put money into schemes and initiatives and really get behind stuff, and but then when things are bad, then it's a lot easier, like Abigail said, to pick up the phone to the person who did something last time. But there's so much more that should and could be done when it comes to recruitment, which is obviously, my bag. Whether times are good or bad, that should just be a given. And a lot of that comes down to thought, really thinking about it, and actually being a kind, nice, good fair human at the top of the chain, or whoever the hiring manager is, because, you know, let's face it, if you've got someone who doesn't really care about any of that, or making a really great creative diverse team because he just wants to work with their mate, then that is never going to change, whether times are good or bad and there's loads of money or there's not. It's about trying to regulate and also be super aware of your internal hiring practices as an indie, and the people who are in hiring positions actually having support themselves, because a lot of them are freelancers. A lot of people who are making hires have probably only started in their job yesterday and then are suddenly hiring for a company or a team, and they don't know much about that, or the ethics of a team, or what's expected of them. And so I feel that it would be really important for those people to get some level of training, or at least one quick conversation about what is expected of a company. And, you know, have you actually thought about what that job looks like and the skills that you need from that job, rather than sticking an ad on Facebook, which, let's face it, is kind of crazy, just saying I need an AP to start Monday. Well, of course you're going to get a zillion inappropriate or like unsuitable emails that you then can't reply to. So for me, there are lots of things that production companies can do. Like, none of this solves there aren't any jobs crisis, but during this time, production companies could be really drilling down into their systems and processes, which is so incredibly unsexy and boring, but actually can massively alleviate the pain of people in-house who are making hires or who are really already doing too much in terms of, you know, templates of emails to let people down nicely, and actual communication. Oh my God, I could talk about that all day. It's something that's been massively lacking in this whole thing. And, you know, I just feel that there's so much more to be done in that space that would actually make everybody feel better, feel more included, whether you're in work, out of work, to try and make an informed decision, and also just feel part of something, which, let's face it, as freelancers, you often don't.
Absolutely. James?
I was going to say, and something to talk about things that wouldn't have a cost impact, something which wouldn't cost any extra money, in theory, is when we get green lights. So a lot of the time, green lights are happening, like you said, on a Friday, and are expecting the production to start on a Monday. In theory, we could build more time in and allow recruitment to happen in a more fair way, and it would mean that things were a lot better just from the start without costing any extra money. And that's one simple thing that I think could make a big impact.
Can I just come back on I'm going to agree with you, I can come back on you. Just from a broadcaster point of view on that, I completely agree with you. I think, and we talk about this at UK TV, and I'm not saying we get it right, but absolutely working with the production company and managing our own expectations internally to allow ourselves enough time to recruit properly is really important. And from a broadcaster point of view on Minori, your question before, your question about whether the indies can overpromise. From a broadcaster point of view, I think it's absolutely the shared responsibility of the indie and the broadcaster to deal with that. And so at UK TV, we go through budgets line by line, not because we want to bring the budget down, because we want to be realistic. And broadcasters absolutely need to be realistic about their expectations in terms of editorial delivery. And they need to either adjust the number of episodes or adjust the way the show is made, adjust the editorial ambition of it in order to make the amount of money kind of, you know, go the distance. Because as we know, it's the bigger indies and the kind of super indies that will push back on a broadcaster and say, we haven't got enough money. It's the smaller ones that actually need protection. Because you're right, James, they always take that work. As I did when I was in an indie that was starting out, you know, you're desperate for anything you can get, literally. So that is a shared responsibility that, on behalf of broadcasters, I completely agree with.
So why aren't broadcasters doing it then?
I can't speak for other broadcasters. That's a very good question. It's a very good question.
I completely understand what you're saying. It makes a lot of perfect sense. And one would think, or like to hope, that people would think about that question then.
I think the important thing about the conversation that we are having around this latest iteration of the plan is I certainly do feel that there is some commitment there to address lots of the things that we've talked about recruitment, about hours, about pay, about all sorts of things. And I think this conversation that we are putting in place, it's not going to be, you know, nothing is going to be resolved overnight. It's not a panacea. But I do, personally, I feel, after a lot of work, and as I said earlier, we've been talking about this a long time, that there is a mood and a willingness to collaborate around trying to address some of these really difficult challenges, and that through that we must ensure that there is change and that freelancers are better supported and that the industry operates in a better way, treats its freelancers in a better way and commits to its workforce. Because one thing that is, we've done 3 surveys about how people are being impacted by the current crisis, and the one metric that goes up every single time is that people are planning on leaving the industry because they can't sustain themselves, and that should be of grave concern to everyone in this industry, because it wasn't 5 minutes ago we were talking about a skills crisis because there weren't enough people.
That's right. And in terms of people leaving the industry, obviously the impact to diversity is cataclysmic, really. And we've seen that in the stats that you guys put out as well. Obviously I'm cognizant of the fact that we are in Scotland, and the nations and regions are often, sometimes completely neglected from conversations. I don't want that to be the case here. Philippa, can you sort of detail the nuances in how we are seeing Scotland, Wales, ultimately affected by the crisis? I know Scotland is a little bit better than in terms of the wider picture.
Yeah. So our latest survey, I wouldn't say that we had a massive response from Scotland. So I don't think you can take this as necessarily gospel. But what I do think is Scotland is the picture is probably quite complex in that I think. I'm right in saying, people will tell me if I'm wrong in saying this, but I think there is more of a tendency in Scotland for people to move perhaps from working in film and TV to theatre or live events and back again. So things are slightly more fluid, I think, in Scotland. But we've also had feedback from the nations and regions that because there isn't so much work in London, people are travelling to the nations and regions for work, and obviously that impacts people who live and try to make a living in the nations and regions as well. So it is quite a complex picture overall. But yes, one absolute takeaway is when there is a crisis, when people are facing real financial challenges, diversity suffers without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kimberly, Abigail, Kimberly, because of what you do with talented people, is that something that you've noticed in terms of the pool of candidates that you're looking at? And Abigail, just in terms of other directors and whatnot, your own personal experiences with your own network what are your observations?
In terms of recruitment, we haven't got any specific stats to say that X% of people have left our database, for example. We wouldn't know that. What I can definitely say, well, anecdotally, absolutely, people from diverse backgrounds who have often, struggled to keep their place in London or, don't have maybe financial backing to be able to stay in the industry are leaving or have left already, for sure. But I think what I can say with confidence is, and sadness is that the positive action that people were taking and beginning to really take seriously has fallen by the wayside for what we can see, with some exceptions in that we are, and I do think a lot of that actually does fall on the responsibility of broadcasters to support the small production companies to make that possible, to actually make positive action to do with DEI and making their teams as diverse and creative as possible. It shouldn't be all on them. As Richard said earlier, it's a collaboration, and we work with UK TV and we're talking to another major broadcaster, which is very exciting, about literally working with them to help their suppliers, so their producers, to search for people from underrepresented groups for their teams. And we've had an incredible success story there with 85% of the people that we have put forward for those jobs across a year being hired. And they would not have been hired if it hadn't been for the broadcaster funding that search. Because production companies, they struggle with the hiring and finding the money for that, especially when there are lots of people available. So they are just going to ring somebody that did it last time, and that's not good enough. But when actually they're told you can have a search with a company that can actually do this properly for you, then that's tangible support, and that's what we need more of.
For sure. Abigail?
It's quite a complex thing, I think, when you're talking about the different constituencies within the industry, because For instance, I was talking to a director on Friday who lives in the nations and regions, in particular he's in Scotland, and he is quite forthright in the fact that there are lots of people from London who come up now, or have been for quite a while, to do the work that he can do, and many others up here can do as well. So you have that to contend with, and his feeling is that people in the nations and regions aren't seen as good enough, which is part of the reason why production companies, broadcasters, whoever, offer work to people from London. And people in London, especially now, it's understandable. If they've offered a job, they're going to say yes and they're going to take it. I think that for me, I think it's weird because you can then get into this sort of territorial thing and trying to understand how you can make it work for people who live in the south who don't have work and have to travel, and people who live in nations and regions who don't have work but can do the work but are not being offered the work, and some of them believing that it's because they're seen as lesser than other people who come from London. So it's trying to understand that and unpick that. But again, a lot of this when we had money, it probably hurt a little bit for some of those people, but it wasn't. I think the effects are now more prominent, and you can clearly see it, and it's affecting people. Then you look at other people in other areas, people people of colour, people with disabilities. They also have issues that have to be dealt with. I think I've been talking to other people. I mean, last week phone was going crazy over this conversation because everyone was coming at me with all their different ways of like how they're being affected and how we can do something about it. And they have very valid points, but a lot of it goes back to having money, because when we have money, it feels a lot better. For some people who this thing that a lot of people are now experiencing, for them it's like 10 to 4 on a Wednesday. This is their normal. They weren't getting a lot of work before this happened, and they might have got a bit more in the pandemic, and then it's gone back to how it used to be.
Yeah.
It hasn't been fair, and it goes back to that whole thing of, well, because a producer or an indie could phone up their mates because they've worked them before, they were the ones who have been neglected. Yeah. So it's a really complex thing, and it's something that we're not going to sort out now. I think the only thing I want to be able to do is try and work out for the shorter term, because you're right, the things that you're talking about are, with the new charter, would work, I would like to think, quite well. But they're the sort of thing you might be waiting 2 years to see the evidence of. People don't have 2 years. And I want to know what we're going to do for people who have not been working for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
That's right.
And also working out with that middle where it's not a case of just the middle going, it's what the middle provided. It provided people with credits, it provided people with opportunities if they were lucky enough to get them. And to be able to move up, they had something tangible. If that middle goes... The mid-market is mid-market programming. You know, if that goes, you have very, very low budget stuff, and then you have extremely high-profile premium stuff. Yeah. I want to have it all, but...
Right. And that's why when we see, obviously, Channel 4, which is, it is, on the face of it, good news, right, in terms of spend returning to, pre-COVID levels, 2019 levels. Of course, we're curious about inflation and how much that, whether that's accounted for. But ultimately, Channel 4, for example, I don't want to kind of single out Channel 4, but just because we've just heard that news yesterday, but them saying, they're only interested in, there needs to be a streaming component to these types of shows. And so that's a certain kind of program that you're thinking of, right? And then everything else would be low cost. And so clearly and from some of the other spotlight sessions already at the festival, we're hearing people say very much the same thing, right? That mid-market is really, it's always been talked about, but now it's actually happening. And so that's going to have a direct impact in terms of jobs.
Because the mid-market was quite a lot of people's bread and butter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it sustains a lot of people.
Yeah, people came up that way, for sure. I want to obviously, because I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions, but also talk about the Action for Freelancers, which of course was also announced yesterday. Now, Richard, that it's building on the Freelance Charter, which was set up in 2021. And there was a lot of, actually, I believe it was it was announced at Edinburgh, wasn't it, the Freelance Charter originally?
It was launched.
It was launched here, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we saw the purple patch, as I explained, and it sort of went a little bit quiet. I know some people have adopted some of the points in the charter, but can you explain sort of why it did sort of fade into the background a little bit? Obviously, a lot of work done by Coalition for Change, and now it's back. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, I think part of it was, so this also speaks to what we're going to do differently second time around, right? I think part of it is around the spike in work that happened off the back of COVID. So the Freelance Charter was, and the Coalition for Change, and the brilliant work that they did bringing people together was born out of COVID. And that was, you know, it all started on Zoom, basically, when we were all kind of working from home. And come 2022, when the volumes of production spiked hugely, like that golden age that didn't last very long, everyone was busy doing that stuff, and the money was kind of flowing. To your point about money, Abigail, that people thought, oh, okay, we're a little bit less worried about that now because actually the money's there, and actually, whilst we talk about the volumes of 2019 and getting back there, our issue to a degree is the fact that in 2022, we had a whole lot, we were kind of like, we need more people, we need more freelancers in the industry. We were desperate to get more people in to make the shows. And in some ways, we're now reacting to that bubble, and it's the kind of differential between then and now that is a real issue. I think that the other thing that didn't happen off the back of the Freelance Charter first time round was it getting rolled out effectively across the industry. And you know, this is not to put the responsibility on producers. This is a shared responsibility. There were a lot of people involved, and Philippa was involved, and James was involved, and Kimberly was involved first time round, and there were a lot of broadcasters involved, but the producers never really kind of had the resource to properly roll out to those people. And so this time around, we have to get the production sector on board, and we also have to resource it properly. To Adil's credit, so Adil Armani, who I know is not up in Edinburgh now, he's got a job and he wasn't able to come, but who did so much work with the Coalition for Change. You know, he to his credit, he was a freelancer, right? And he was trying to work. So it wasn't he just didn't have the ability to kind of spend full time on the Coalition for Change. This time round, we will put money behind, and this is a combination of broadcasters and possibly other people, we will put money behind a project lead in the way that TAP has been structured, with Ali and Tanya, who run that so brilliantly and have achieved so much so quickly, so that we're properly resourced to actually convene the conversations that need to happen and make sure that they're being acted upon. And I think the last kind of area really is around a survey. So we talked about a survey the first time round, and broadcasts were on board to help us kind of promote that, and thank you to them. And I think still on board to promote it this time around. I think it's really important that freelancers have a right of holding the rest of the industry to account, right? And I think the value of the survey is for us to track the progress, for us to be able to say, well, actually, and you know, we've seen this in TAP. Some areas have delivered progress really quickly, others have taken longer. I think there's a number of different work streams within Action for Freelancers. Some might deliver results really quickly, and we need to understand which bits aren't delivering results, and we need to kind of pivot and focus more on those. So I think the survey is also a really important kind of feedback loop, basically.
For sure. Why has it taken so long for Action for Freelancers to come together? Obviously, you know, it's been 18 months of this. I understand there's a lot of different parties, and it's difficult for people to, you know, create the time sometimes to do this. But why has it? Why are we seeing?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think to a degree you've answered the question, which is that there's a lot of people involved. And so I was on a broadcast round table with both of these two brilliant women sitting either side of me, alongside David Pembury from the BBC, and Adil, and Marcus Ryder from the Film and TV Charity. And we was it January?
It was
pretty chilly. And we talked about some of these issues then. And so the work that's happening now is built off the back of that, but it's taken that long. To get people into a room, you know, every time, and this is why the Action for Freelancers has started with a small core. So, you know, we need to get more freelancers involved in terms of generating ideas and being part of that process. But you have to start with a small core, because otherwise, every time you call a meeting, you're trying to rationalize the diaries of 25 people. And it just, you know, and then even if you're missing 10 of those people, then they're kind of behind, and so there's a kind of lag there that is really unhelpful. I think, to Philippa's point earlier, there is definitely more momentum behind this, with more partners involved, film and TV charities, Screen Skills, PACT, Bectu, we've shared the plan with Directors UK just the other day, the broadcasters, and we will expand that out to more people, and as I say, and to freelancers too. There is definitely more momentum behind it this time. It's on us all individually to make sure that that isn't lost and it's delivered upon.
And freelancers will be in regular consultation, of course, as you put this together. Is there anything within the Action for Freelancers plan that is actionable now? I mean, obviously the survey. What about transparency? I know in communication, that's
so I completely agree about transparency. So I think a couple of things. I know, Philippa, you mentioned the Film and TV Charities Hardship Grants. Obviously, those are ongoing. It's really worth reminding people that that is a grant that's up to £750. Not that it's not necessarily £750, but it's up to £750. But people can apply for that every year. And that's it's not a solution, but it can be a stopgap, and it can help people who've got that mortgage payment to make. So I think that's really important to call out. I think I think in terms of other immediate things that we need to focus on, mental health is clearly extremely important. I think to the point about people not knowing whether to kind of stay in the industry or to move or to reskill and to move into different areas, that transparency from broadcasters is really important. I've definitely seen more support for that across the broadcast than I've ever seen before, and all of the broadcasters who have been involved so far have agreed that we will share an aggregated trend kind of analysis around volumes across the whole industry. And I think from my point of view, if I came out and I said, UK TV are going to do 2 extra dramas next year, I don't think any individual freelancer is going to act off the back of that. What we need is a complete picture across the industry of what is happening around volumes in different genres. As I say, all of the broadcasters that have been involved in the conversation so far have committed to doing that.
And surely that is so easy and it's free. Communicating, I mean. And, it's something that more than anything, with so few people for freelancers to turn to, that an independent company like ours that works with people and usually finds them jobs, but currently is even trickier, people come to us and go, I've literally got no one else to ask this. They don't have a coach, they can't afford, they don't have mentors. They're like, we don't know what's going on. And I've been fairly vocal on LinkedIn about stuff because I feel like I can be, and I'm not saying anything, legendary. I'm just being honest about what's going on in my world and from what I see, because we're in that privileged position of talking to indies every day and talking to freelancers all the time. So I feel like I can share, and I don't understand why others aren't. It's free, it's easy, it's inclusive, it's the right thing to do. Even if there's nothing really to say, actually just talking and letting people know that you are listening, you are there, and this is what we've experienced this month at our production company, or it really does go a very long way to help people both kind of get the temperature of what's going on, but also just be able to sort of make decisions. And I know what you're saying, Richard, they're not going to suddenly decide to stay or go based on one announcement, but they've been left completely in the dark and have heard nothing except for the odd person like me and a couple of other people who are happy to put it out there because we don't answer to anyone.
I think the flip side to that, Kimberly, as well, is that a lot of freelancers feel that they can't speak up and they can't say anything for fear that they won't work because of what they've said publicly.
Right.
I'm sort of a bit unusual, and Abigail perhaps as well, but by both of the fact that we're being here, we're sticking our head up on the parapet, we're putting our names to this. But I do take the responsibility of speaking on behalf of freelancers seriously. And honestly, I heard from so many people ahead of being here today, and it's sort of quite overwhelming, and it's impossible to sort of say all the things that you want to articulate. And one of the big things that I hope with this next iteration of the Charter is that freelancers are central to it, and they have to be intrinsically involved at every single stage. It can't just be what do you think about this survey sort of every year. It needs to be like, right guys, let's sit down, let's talk about this. How can we improve this experience, and getting people around a table and sort of brainstorming, I suppose, and making sure that freelancers are involved from the very outset of it.
I think the issue is it's the uncertainty of it all.
Yeah.
It's because people just don't know what to do, and they've invested so much of their lives and their careers. And some of us have not gone to friends' weddings or not gone to parties, or you've done all that stuff because you want to keep your career train on the tracks and keep it going. And because there is an absence of communication, that uncertainty, I think, is what's fueling people's unfortunate mental health, because they don't know what to do next and they want someone to tell them. And I think, unfortunately, it doesn't, what we want to hear, I get the whole point about the aggregation, but what people want to hear is that there are, what they want is, we want to be back in 2019. Yeah. But it's probably not going to come back. Mm-hmm. And hearing that they don't want to hear that. They've invested themselves in this. And when people go, oh, you can just pivot, do you know what I mean? It kind of feels a bit of an affront because they've invested so much in this thing. It's like having a bad relationship. You put so much energy into this thing, and now they're either gaslighting you or ignoring you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the bit of, as a freelancer, you're trying to understand.
People need the information.
Where is your plate? Yeah, where's your... And when you hear, like, when for instance, Channel 4 say about how much the advertising spend is better, and there was the ITV one, those numbers can be big, and it looks great, but I think a lot of people go, yeah, but how does it affect me?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the disconnect, and I don't know how... Well, I kind of have a few little ideas, but they're not going to touch the surface, probably, of what we need to deal with right now.
I wanted to ensure that we have time for questions, and we do have a number of them rolling in. Just very quickly, someone has asked, Richard keeps referring to TAP. What is it? TAP is, of course, the TV Access project, which relates to disability and has made incredible strides even in the last few weeks. Richard, that is very much the model.
Yeah, TV Access project, which I know a number of the people in the room that I saw come in earlier are involved with, was set up off the back of Jack Thorne's McTaggart lecture, specifically to look at the levels of representation of disability. Well, more than that, but around disability and representation of the DDN communities in TV. And it's had an extraordinary impact, I think, in the last couple of years. I think it's been going pretty much 2 years now. I think it's probably launched the back end of the year, so it's coming out for 2 years. And it, to the credit of those who've run it, as I say, particularly Tanya Mosey, Ali Castle, Nicola Garde, and those who've supported it across the industry, it's been a properly collaborative effort. And that is really, with resource working on it day in, day out, and support from across the industry, it has achieved a great deal in that area very quickly.
For sure, it's received the buy-in that we sort of expect for other programs and don't always see, so it's been very impressive. We're losing our best mid-career talent, especially from underrepresented communities. How do we retain them to secure the future of the industry? Mid-career talent.
Yeah, and yeah, that's spot on, because there's never enough, but there's a fair amount of support for new entrants and initiatives, etc. But yes, that is exactly where we see the drop-off at mid, when people are trying to get their next break. I mean, I think shadowing, mentoring, positive action towards actually meeting these people, and there's no such thing as a perfect CV, right? And some of these people may well have perfect CV and they're still dropping out, but I think it is so vital to keep up meeting people and having that consistent process when you're hiring, which isn't just choosing that one person who was great last time, but it is looking at and interviewing people in the mix. But in terms of supporting them specifically, I mean, that's all we can do together is keep checking ourselves and meeting people and trying to, I think shadowing is really excellent. I don't think there's enough, but that needs to go into budgets. It needs to be thought about at the very beginning of everything and then baked into the entire production.
And I know, sorry, go on, Jen.
No, all I was going to say is that, if we are losing people from the industry, what is the cost of that as well? Because we're losing really valuable experience, and that's going to cost the industry money, because ultimately people we're going to have to train people up, and then because people aren't experienced, they'll make mistakes that will have a cost impact as well. So there are sort of these unintended consequences that sort of come about that we need to think about too.
So I think this is a really important thing for Action for Freelancers to grapple with. Philippa used an expression the other day, which is that so far we've had conversations about having conversations, right? So we've talked about how we're going to have the conversations. That needs to be central to some of the conversations. And I think this is an area that Screen Skills, who are one of the partners that we're working with, I know are very conscious about and are looking at. We've got to think holistically about continued professional development across the TV industry. Absolutely. We've got to think about the consistency of qualification. We've got to think about communicating out opportunities around initiatives, around skills, around training. We've got to think much, much more cleverly about how we support that kind of mid-career tier. Because I absolutely agree that to lose that, I come back to what I said before, which is I genuinely believe we have the best creative industry globally. We've got an amazing set of people, but we don't look after them at our own peril, basically.
I think part of it is it's quite challenging. I think you could do that when you're in a staff position, because you can see a trajectory, you can kind of aim for, you start as a researcher and you want to be an exec producer in the future, so that you know what the path is. If you're a freelancer, you kind of have to make that path up yourself, and that requires you being offered the kind of work that can enable that path. And I think definitely the Charter will have to really consider how you do that with a freelance industry when people are jumping from one job to another, they're jumping from one indie to another, they're working for multiple broadcasters or streamers. And I think it's is having the foresight and working out how do you do that with a freelance industry.
Yeah, there's a behaviour in kind of hiring managers and in employers to be much, much more flexible about the people they take on, to the point that we've all raised about, I need someone in 48 hours, I'm going to hire my mate that I've worked with before. We've all got to think, we've got to look at CVs in a different way and think much, much more cleverly about getting a kind of diversity of voice and experience into our productions, because we're more flexible about the whole thing.
I mean, I think we need to look at other models as well of working, and I know of at least 2 or 3 companies, and actually all regional, who want to keep hold of good people, so they are able to put them on a longer contract, say a 12-month contract, and they move them from one production to another. I appreciate you can only do that if you've got a returning series or several returning series, but talk about people at the mid-level, think about edit producers or production managers who you can do that with, and that all of a sudden gives people the stability that they want. And another thing, I know in America, for example, there are quite a lot of people who are on deals with individual networks. So it might mean that you have a deal with like ABC, but you as a freelancer, you'll still work for ABC, but you will work for individual production companies within that, but you're going to have work on ABC shows. So I think we need to talk about these options and think about how we can support things like that in this country.
That's an interesting model for sure. A number of questions here, so I just want to, in the time that we have, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for TV? People are saying survive till 2026, but those of us struggling just want to make it through this year.
I hate that phrase, I'm really sorry. I find it
sort of universally hated, isn't it?
Yeah, I understand why, but my fear is that if 25 doesn't happen, this is going to sound pretty flippant, but what rhymes with 26? That's the flippancy. And then it's the reality, which is no one's got a crystal ball that's going to tell you what 25 is going to look like. And I think, again, it goes back to the uncertainty, because I want the people who are saying that everything's better and the money's coming in, advertising going up, and we're spending as much as we did pre-COVID. But when you're on the ground and I'm talking to people in the different constituencies within the industry, and they're not feeling it, they're hanging on to that phrase because they're hopeful. But that isn't a strategy. And I think we need to work out what that strategy is pretty quickly. Because we are going to lose those people, and with those people goes institutional knowledge. It just goes out the door, and some of them might just think, well, what's the point of coming back, because I can't see if it's going to be sustainable for me as a career. That's the unfortunate thing we have. I mean, there are things I think we can do a bit better, but they don't necessarily address the current situation. I hate being a Debbie Downer. I want to be solutions focused. That's what this whole panel was about.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard from people who would be much happier taking a pay cut in a more stable job than staying in TV, and they're just ready to go. And so, you talk about losing people in the future. I think it's already happened.
Yeah,
it's already happened.
It's happening.
And it's just, pretty terrible.
Sure. Someone has asked, can you do a show of hands to see who's come to this? Are we preaching to the choir? Or are there indie bosses, commissioners here too? How many of you consider yourself freelancers? Okay. Indie bosses, full-timers? Okay, all right, a decent...
Any commissioners?
Commissioners?
Because I do feel slightly sorry for commissioners as well. I know it's really unpopular, because I don't think anyone wants to be in a position where they can't give people the thing that they actually came into the industry to work with. Do you know what I mean? I think it's it's weirdly, it's affecting everybody, but to a different degree. But essentially, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, the really important thing that we don't have is the money to make this happen. I think also we have to be a bit more, like, God forbid there's another pandemic or anything like that again, but we are trying to make hay when it's fucking raining.
Yeah.
Do you know, and that's where we are right now. I mean, this is the kind of thing, for me, it's a bit of a historical thing, and I hope I've got it right. When terms of trade happened initially, back in the day when Margaret Thatcher decided to do it, I think that, with hindsight, we didn't look after what the freelancer economy and industry was going to be about. So, quite rightly at the time, IP went back to the indies, but I don't think anyone thought wider than that. And so, if you had Who Wants to Be a Bake Off, you owned the IP, but if I worked on it, I get a day rate, and that's it, end of story. So it makes it a bit challenging. I think we have to think of new ways, and that's where I kind of have to go, I don't know. I think better people, brighter people,
Well,
we have
hopefully,
to...
action for
To
freelancers.
Yes.
the other point about money in the industry, so alongside this piece about employment status and benefits and the important work that you've been feeding into, Philippa, and the British Green Forum are doing, I think it's really important we look at tax credits. So I think we've fallen behind some other countries in terms of the kind of competitiveness of our tax credits. To that point about having the best workforce globally, we should be attracting more money in from other countries. So that's one thing that this is not a next week thing.
Yeah.
This is something that's going to take longer to do. We need to do all these things. We need to do the long-term things, the medium-term things, and the short-term things. I think it's really important that we look at how we can drive more money into the UK creative industry.
Is that something, Philippa, in your conversations that has sort of come up? And is there some interest from DCMS around specifically? I mean, the unscripted tax relief obviously has gotten a fair bit of support in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure that Labour have yet sort of pronounced on tax credits and their views around them, but definitely I think it's something that we as a country need to be quite agile about and keep an eye on, because we are working in a global industry, and it only takes one change in another jurisdiction to impact what happens here. But so yes, all of these things I think we need to talk about, and I really do think that we ought to be, looking at the way the industry works and how freelancers are compensated, and with a blank sheet of paper, and really think about whether there are alternative models that will work better for us in the UK and will support people better, because I'm just absolutely convinced there has to be structural change, because otherwise we're going to just go through cycles like this where we're either looking for skills and can't find them, or people are on their knees because they can't pay their bills. So there has to be a really serious conversation. There has to be some structural change. One of the things that's really positive from my perspective is that freelancers have been looking for a collective voice, and thankfully, they're coming to us saying that they want to have that collective voice, and to Directors UK as well, who've been talking an awful lot about the crisis too. So I think it's really important that we continue to have those conversations, that freelancers do have a voice, and that we come up with real solutions through the conversations that we're having. I'm trying to be upbeat because, of course, I have to hope for change, and I think we all hope for change. But that doesn't at all minimise the real crisis that I know people are going through financially, in terms of their mental health and decisions about their futures.
Absolutely. Well, luckily this festival happens every year, so we can check back in about 12 months' time and see how much progress has been made, obviously with Action for Freelancers and all the other work that is happening. We are at time, so I'm going to, a number of the questions as well, I think, thank you very much for your questions. They do sort of touch on things that have come up and some things that are, quite frankly, simply unanswerable right now. And maybe over the course of the next few days with Edinburgh, we'll work towards some sort of answer or something. But right now, I think I will draw the line. Thank you so much to our panelists, especially James and Abigail, for coming on, and Philippa, Richard, Kimberly, you were amazing. Thank you very much for the commissioners, the indie bosses, the freelancers, everyone who actually showed up to this and took an interest. And I hope you have a great rest of festival. Thank you.